I'm Leigh, and this is my Catholic Witness. My name is Leigh Mateo. I'm a nurse practitioner. I grew up in Tampa, Florida. I'm currently living in North Carolina, and I survived 14 years of private school, Catholic education. So I love being Catholic, and I'm excited to do this interview. My dad was a practicing Catholic. My mom was raised Baptist and then was Methodist while I was growing up. So for a while we would alternate weekends of going to different services. My dad is Cuban, so it's very much culturally to be Catholic for the Cuban culture. So I think for him that was a big part of who he was and what he wanted us to be. So they were married in the Catholic Church, and my mom agreed to raise us Catholic. So one of my fondest memories I have is we had a white, it was like a beginner's Bible. It was a hard covered book. And I can remember reading those stories all the time of Jonah and, the Ark and Noah and David and Goliath and the Garden of Eden. And I think, it's interesting that was such a basis of like what I started associating just religion and faith and God with. And so that, I think, kind of those stories and those ideas of strength and faith and everything kind of shaped a lot of what I believe and still believe. And then prayer, I think, was a big thing growing up. We would say the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. His love goes with me through the night and wakes me in the morning light." And then would follow the litany of everybody that we're thankful for. And I think prayer was a big thing. Even at meals, we would pray at meals. And so as early as I can remember, prayer was a big part of my faith as a child. Growing up Catholic, it's kind of always there. So it's always something that was a choice for us. We were never, forced to do anything. We were guided, I like to say. But when as a teenager, it was kind of presented in a way as, you can choose to do this, you can choose to do that. And it was always encouraged. And a lot of times my parents would be like, well, we'll pay for you to go to the youth group trip, but we won't pay for you to go to Adventure Island with your friends or something like that, So if you want to do that, you have to make your own money. But so I always thought that was kind of funny because they would like kind of, persuade us to do that. Yeah. So, and I think I was really blessed to just have a parish that was very supportive of youth ministry. And so I think that really influenced how my faith kind of changed, and it became my own. It became those stories, and those prayers became my own stories and my own prayers. So in the beginning, I think my dad's mom had a lot of influence just by the presence of what she would hang in her house, or what, the kind of the cultural part of it, just seeing those images. And she did also encourage prayer and things like that. But I think mainly that was the beginning of kind of an exposure to somebody who really like believed. And I think as I grew up, I went to private school, so I had a lot of nuns influencing me. So one of my confirmation sponsors was actually a Salesian sister. So it was really neat to kind of get to walk that walk with her. And I constantly always in the back of my head have the thoughts of her praying for me daily and things like that. And I think she was really influential in my journey from from 8th grade on. And then finally I had a very good youth minister. So I met her probably in about 8th grade, and throughout my entire high school, and we're still very close today. She's really provided me with a lot of guidance and real life examples of how to live the faith. And I think that's what really has helped me a lot in my journey, is having those examples of somebody who's living it every day. I think the Eucharist is one of the most powerful sacraments, and I think when you're first communion, you're in 2nd grade, you don't really understand the whole concept really of what it actually means. I think you go through kind of the actions, and there's an idea of who God is, and that he's present there, but it never really becomes, I think, a real experience until you actually start to really think about it and kind of let it affect you. So I remember we used to have a youth mass, and we'd be able to come up to the altar and actually be there during the consecration, and we'd surround the priest. And I remember one of those times there was just like very it just clicked for me. I was standing there and I was watching and I was like, that's Jesus. Like I believed it and I knew it, but it actually made sense then. And I think that was a really neat practice that I was able to participate in, to be on the altar and actually feel and see like what the priest was doing and what was actually happening during that transubstantiation. So I think the Eucharist is one of my, one of my most influential sacraments, I guess you can say, and the fact that we can do it every day is pretty cool.
After having that experience, did it change kind of your experience of masses from then on?
I think I guess I could say it kind of made me more just aware of what the mass was for. What I always thought in my head, like, oh, it's an act of thanksgiving, but it's so much more than that. And I think that's when it started to really click to me, and I didn't want to miss mass ever, and I think that's when I was like, well, this is where I want to be, like, and I think that's been one of the best things that's ever happened, is that idea of that's where I can meet Jesus whenever. Vocation is an interesting topic, and especially for a Catholic. I think so. It's more like a journey, so I kind of see it as different parts. Right now I think my vocation is to the single life, and I think that's still the vocation that I'm living out. I think the journey is influenced by prayer. I don't think you can discern without prayer, and I think in conversation. So conversation with those that are close to you, conversation with those that aren't close to you, conversation with those you work with. It's kind of those influences helping you through, those influences that are obviously sent from God to help you figure out what it is His will. And I think that's what I've always thought of my discernment is, I always say a little prayer, I'm willing to be made willing, like use me how what it is your will, and I'll do it. And I think that's kind of how I am in the process of discernment.
Do you feel like being single has enabled you to be of service in a different way?
Yeah, 100%. So that's kind of how I see it. There's things that I wouldn't be able to give of my time, talent, or treasure that I couldn't if I wasn't in, living a single vocation right now. And I think, we as single people living that vocation have a big responsibility to the church and to Catholicism, because a lot of times we have the time and the talent to give and serve in that role. So yeah.
So within your vocation of like the big four vocations, you're also called to be nurse practitioner and to serve that way. Do you feel like that's a call from God?
Oh yes, for sure. I think there's no way that I could do my job without in my head thinking that it's what's God's will for me. I think the challenges and the that come along with being in medicine in general and meeting people at those vulnerable moments, you have to see Jesus in their faces and Jesus in their situations, or you become really callous. At one point I was working in the VA hospital, so it was a homeless veteran, and he came in and we were taking care of him. He'd been a frequent flyer, so we'd seen him a couple times in the hospital. But I remember, at one point I had some extra time, which rarely happens, but I actually did have time, and I thought to myself, let me give some attention to him, and so I started actually, I went in and I spent some time talking to him, and I noticed, that he just seemed very distant, and I wasn't really communicating with me that much, and so I was like, okay, so I did a couple other tasks, and it was time for his bath, and usually he was kind of, he couldn't do it on his own in the state he was, so we give bed baths to people. And I remember I was doing my normal bath, and I got to his feet and I started washing his feet, and it really made me think of like, this is like servant, this is what the disciples did, this is what we're called to do. And like, I think at that moment it kind of just clicked for me, like, I'm walking that walk, and I like finished cleaning his feet off, whatever, and he had been non-communicative, not really talkative at all, and he just said thank you when I was done. And I remember thinking, like, just that little thank you was like, it must have been sent from God, to make me feel like, that was appreciated and that I was doing the right thing for him. One of the main ones that kind of sticks out to me is in high school I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So, in that age, 15, I was 14 years old or so, and you still seem kind of invincible. You don't really think anything can happen to you. You think, you're going to be fine. And in my head, I think that I still thought that, even though with I was, diagnosed with the chronic illness. But I think I remember at one point thinking, reading some scriptures and just thinking back to, the saying that God doesn't give you more than you can handle, and I think that was really stuck with me always. It's just He's not going to give you more than you can handle. So, looking back, I think that diagnosis was a big motivator for what I did with my life professionally, and I think that when you can look at a burden like that, or a challenge like that, that it's actually a motivator for something better. I think that's a gift from God. He allows you to see it in that way, and I think that's what He's done with a lot of my challenges. He sees them. He lets me see them as an opportunity for growth, or an opportunity for something more. Oh, I love infant baptism. I just love the idea of that. It's like a new family member, a new Catholic. I think everything about that tradition and that sacrament, I mean, is beautiful to me. I think it's just like I used to have in college. They would play like this. Once the infants were baptized, they'd play like this very joyful song, just like a celebration. And I think that was like so fun to me. And then they'd have kind of like them process in their new white garments. And I think that the idea of us welcoming like our new family members, our new brothers and sisters, and like understanding our responsibility to build them up in a church that's welcoming. And I think that's one of my favorite Catholic traditions. So.
And you're a godmother, right? To
Yes.
At an infant baptism. How was that experience for you?
Oh, that was awesome. So it was really neat because I got to actually hold Luke as they were actually baptizing him. So I really it was really such a neat experience for me, and I love it. The one thing about being Catholic that I would want the world to know is that we're a people of service. It's a religion of service. It's a faith of service. We are Catholic because we serve, and I think that if more people were able to think of their obligation and their duty to serve, I think we'd see a lot of great effects. And I think that's been one of the biggest things that's influenced me as being Catholic is my call to service, and my call to engage in those selfless acts of service for others. I think that's where you grow. That's where you see Jesus the most. And so I think that's what I'd want everyone to know.